The detention facility on Nexus Prime hummed with the low vibration of energy shields and life support systems. General Kexthara had been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours, her 4 amber eyes fixed on the metal table before her. The Zephyrian's chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, but today she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of memories she had carried for 3 decades. The tribunal chamber was a stark contrast to the war rooms, where she had once commanded fleets that could glass entire planets. Here everything was white and sterile, designed to strip away pretense and force truth into the open. The air recyclers whispered constantly, a mechanical breath that reminded everyone present they were far from any natural world. Arbiter Velkos leaned forward, his crystalline features catching the light. As a member of the hegemony's oldest species, he had overseen dozens of war crime tribunals. His patience was legendary, but even he seemed eager to finally hear the testimony that had eluded them for so long. "General Kexthara," he began, his voice carrying the authority of ages, "you understand why you are here. The Sol campaign changed everything. Species that had served the hegemony for millennia suddenly turned against us. Entire fleets defected. Our most loyal soldiers abandoned their posts to join human colonies. The galaxy demands answers." Kexithara's secondary arms twitched, a nervous habit she had developed since her retirement. She had been the youngest general in Zephyrian history, promoted after single-handedly crushing the Andromedian rebellion. Her tactical brilliance had been compared to the ancient war masters, and her loyalty to the hegemony was unquestioned. "Until the humans, you commanded the 7th Fleet, the 12th Armada, and the elite storm battalions," Arbiter Velkos continued. "Over 2 million soldiers under your direct command. Tell us about humanity's war crimes. Tell us how they corrupted our forces." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Kexithara's mandibles clicked slowly, a sound that had once struck fear into the hearts of her enemies. Now, it seemed, almost mournful. "You misunderstand the nature of our defeat," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The humans committed no crimes. That was precisely what made them so terrifying." The other arbiters exchanged glances. Arbiter Zix Nara, whose species had been enslaved by humans in the early days of the conflict, leaned forward aggressively. "General, we have reports of psychological warfare, of our soldiers being brainwashed, of—" "No." Kexthara's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. She straightened, and for a moment the legendary general was visible again. "They didn't fight like warriors. They fought like gardeners, cultivating something in the hearts of our soldiers that we had spent millennia trying to eliminate." "Arbiter." Velkos felt a chill run through his crystalline form. "What do you mean?" Kexthara's 4 eyes seemed to look through the walls of the chamber, seeing something far beyond. "When I was a juvenile, freshly molted and eager for battle, my clutch mother told me that war was about breaking the enemy's will to fight. We learned to see other species as obstacles to be removed, resources to be claimed, territories to be conquered. It was efficient. It was logical." She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The humans saw war as a conversation. Every battle was an attempt to understand us better. Every engagement was a chance to learn something new about who we were and who we could become." The tribunal chamber seemed to grow colder. Outside, the massive space station continued its eternal rotation, but inside, time seemed frozen. "I remember the first engagement clearly," Kexthara continued. "The human fleet was outnumbered 5 to 1. Standard doctrine said they should surrender or die fighting. Instead, they sent us a message." Her mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "It wasn't a surrender, it wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to dance." "Dance?" Arbiter Zixanara's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's what they called it. They had studied our combat formations, our ship movements, our tactical preferences. They had turned our own battle doctrines into a form of art. When we engaged them, it wasn't warfare as we understood it. It was choreography." Kexithara's secondary arms gestured as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. They moved there, ships in patterns that complemented our formations rather than opposed them. They forced us to fight at our absolute best, to push our tactical abilities to their limits. And when we did, when we performed these impossible maneuvers and executed perfect strategies, they applauded. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Arbiter Velkos found his voice. They applauded, over every communication channel. Not mockery, genuine appreciation for the skill of their opponents. They had turned war into a celebration of what each species could achieve when pushed to their limits. The tribunal members looked at each other with growing unease. This was not the testimony they had expected. The holographic display flickered to life above the tribunal table, showing the Kepler system as it had appeared 30 years ago. 3 small colonies orbiting a yellow star, their combined population barely reaching 2 million humans. To the galactic hegemony, they were nothing more than a minor obstacle in their expansion toward the resource-rich outer rim. Kexthara's 4 eyes tracked the movement of tiny ship icons across the display. The 7th Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at 0600 hours Galactic Standard Time. 47 dreadnoughts, 200 cruisers, and over 1,000 support vessels. The largest force ever assembled for such a small target. Her mandibles clicked as she manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the lead ships. Our intelligence indicated the humans had no significant military presence. A few patrol boats, some mining vessels converted with basic weapons. Standard doctrine called for a demonstration of overwhelming force to encourage immediate surrender. Arbiter Velkos leaned forward, studying the tactical display. What was your opening move? We targeted their communication arrays first, then their power generators. Clean surgical strikes designed to leave their colonies helpless, but intact. The plan was to occupy their worlds within 72 hours and begin integration into the hegemony. Kexthara's voice carried no emotion, but her secondary arms trembled slightly. The hologram shifted, showing energy beams lancing out from the hegemony fleet toward the human installations. Explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum of space, followed by the cascade failure of power grids across the 3 worlds. But something went wrong immediately, Kexthara continued. Instead of panic or surrender broadcasts, we received medical requests. The humans were asking for assistance with their wounded, not demanding terms or threatening retaliation. She paused, her breathing becoming slightly labored. Commander Vexital laughed when he heard the first transmission. He thought it was some kind of primitive psychological warfare, trying to make us lower our guard through appeals to mercy. He ordered the second wave of strikes. The hologram showed more explosions, this time targeting what appeared to be defensive installations. But as the display zoomed in, the arbiters could see these weren't military targets at all. They were hospitals, schools, and refugee centers. That's when we encountered our first problem, Kexthara said quietly. Our bombardment had damaged a human medical facility, and there were Zephyrian civilians inside, traders who had been doing business with the colonies when the attack began. Arbiter Zixnara's crystalline features hardened. Zephyrian civilians? What were they doing in human space? The humans had established trade agreements with dozens of species, including some from hegemony worlds. They welcomed anyone who came, in peace regardless of their allegiance. Kexthara's voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. When our attack began, they immediately moved all non-human civilians to their emergency shelters. The holographic display shifted again, showing small transport ships moving between the human colonies and the hegemony fleet. These weren't military vessels, but converted civilian craft, their hulls painted with medical symbols. They sent shuttles to our fleet, Kexthara continued, her voice growing stronger. Unarmed shuttles carrying our wounded civilians and requesting medical assistance for their own people. Commander Vextel ordered them destroyed, but when our gunners targeted the ships, they hesitated. She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on one of the small shuttles. Through its transparent aluminum viewport, the arbiters could see humans, working frantically to stabilize injured Zephyrians, their hands covered in purple blood that was distinctly alien to their physiology. The shuttle pilot was a human named Hyun Woo. He had been a surgeon before the war, but when the attack began, he volunteered to fly medical runs between the colonies and our fleet. He transmitted continuously, providing medical updates on our people and requesting permission to transfer the most critically injured to our ships. Kexthara's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Vextal finally allowed one shuttle to dock with his command ship. Standard protocol was to take the Zephyrian civilians and execute the human crew as enemy combatants. But when the airlock opened, Hyunwoo didn't try to escape or fight. He simply asked where he could set up his medical equipment. The hologram now showed the interior of a hegemony warship, its sterile corridors filled with activity as human medical personnel worked alongside Zephyrian crew members. The scene was surreal, enemy species working together in the middle of an active war zone. Vextal had been wounded in a training accident years earlier, and the injury had never healed properly. It caused him constant pain, but Zephyrian medical doctrine considered it a sign of weakness to seek treatment. Hyunwoo noticed the way Vextal moved and offered to examine the old wound. Kexthara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What happened next changed everything. Hyunwoo spent 18 hours straight in surgery, repairing damage that our own doctors had said was permanent. He used techniques that combined human medicine with Zephyrian physiology, creating something entirely new. The arbiters watched in fascination as the hologram showed the human surgeon working tirelessly, his hands steady despite the exhaustion visible in his face. Around him, Zephyrian soldiers stood guard, but their weapons were lowered, their attention focused on the delicate work being performed. When Vextal woke up, he was pain-free for the first time in 15 years, but more than that, he was confused. This human, this enemy, had risked his own life to save someone who had been trying to kill him hours earlier. Kexthara's 4. Eyes seemed to lose focus, as if she was seeing something far away. Do you understand what this did to our forces? Vextal had been conditioned since hatching to view aliens as inferior, as obstacles to be removed or resources to be exploited. Yet here was this soft-skinned biped, exhausted and bloodied, refusing to let him die. She stood suddenly, her full height impressive even in the confines of the tribunal chamber. Within a week, half of Vextal's battalion was asking questions about prisoner protocols, about the treatment of civilians, about the purpose of the war itself. The humans had done something we thought impossible. They had made our soldiers doubt the righteousness of the war by showing them compassion. The hologram flickered and died, leaving the chamber in stark, artificial light. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications that none of the arbiters wanted to acknowledge. The communication array aboard the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Admiral Kexthara expected the usual battle reports or strategic updates, but instead, a calm human voice filled the bridge with words that made her blood run cold. Lieutenant Corvus of the 3rd Assault Wing, the voice began in perfect Zephyrian dialect. I hope this message finds you well. I recently discovered a collection of poetry attributed to your clutch mother, Velnara the Star Weaver. Her work about the spawning pools of Zephyr Prime moved me deeply. Kexthara's mandibles clicked in shock. Clutch mother names were sacred, never shared with outsiders. How could a human possibly know such intimate details about one of her junior officers? The voice continued, reciting verses in ancient Zephyrian that even many of her own soldiers couldn't understand. The silver moons dance on waters deep, where new life stirs in sacred sleep. Your mother's words capture the beauty of your homeworld in ways that our own poets struggle to achieve. Across the bridge, Lieutenant Corvus stood frozen, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. The human was quoting his clutch mother's most private works, poems that had never been published or shared beyond their family nest. This is Commander Ji-hoon of the Human Defense Fleet, the voice continued. I've been studying your cultures for months now, and I must say, the depth of Zephyrian artistic expression is remarkable. Your people have turned the simple act of spawning into an art form that celebrates the continuity of life across generations. Kexthara moved to cut the transmission, but something in Corvus's expression stopped her. The young lieutenant's face showed a mixture of confusion and wonder that she had never seen before. I particularly admire the way your clutch mother describes the first breath of a newborn Zephyrian, Ji-hoon's voice continued. The trembling of wings that have never known flight, the chittering sounds of a voice that will one day command starships. There's a poetry in your biology that transcends species. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Kexthara watched as Corvus slowly removed his helmet, his movements mechanical and uncertain. How did he know? Corvus whispered. Those poems were never translated into Standard Galactic. They exist only in our family archives. Before Kexithara could respond, another transmission began. This time, the human's voice switched to the deep, resonant tones of ancient Krathari. Captain Zilthek, I've been reading the philosophical works of your ancestor, Mighty Thunderclaw. His treatise on honor in combat has changed my understanding of what it means to be a warrior. Captain Zilthek, a massive Krathari whose people resembled upright lizards with razor-sharp claws, stepped forward in amazement. His species communicated through complex harmonic frequencies, and hearing a human reproduce them perfectly was impossible. The concept of victory through worthy opposition resonates deeply with me, Ji-hoon continued in flawless Krathari. Your ancestor wrote that a true warrior finds no honor in defeating a weak enemy, but instead seeks to elevate their opponent to their highest potential before engaging in combat. Zilthek's throat sac expanded and contracted rapidly, a sign of extreme emotional distress. Impossible, he growled. Thunderclaw's writings were destroyed in the Great Purge centuries ago. No copies exist. But Ji-hoon wasn't finished. The transmission shifted again, this time to the melodic tones of Vexti collective speech. To the Vexti aboard the vessel Hivemind's Dream, I offer greetings in the harmony of the whole. Your species' ability to think as one while maintaining individual identity is perhaps the most beautiful form of consciousness I've ever encountered. The three Vexti officers on the bridge began vibrating in unison, their shared consciousness rippling with confusion. No outsider had ever spoken their collective language without being linked to their hive mind. I've been studying your contribution to galactic mathematics, Ji-hoon continued. The theorem of parallel infinities, developed by your collective 17 cycles ago, has applications in faster-than-light travel that we're only beginning to understand. Kexithara felt her world shifting beneath her feet. These weren't random facts that a human spy might have gathered. This was deep, intimate knowledge of cultures that many hegemony species had forgotten about themselves. But perhaps most impressive of all, Ji-hoon's voice returned to Standard Galactic, is how each of your species has found unique ways to express the universal desire for connection, for meaning, for growth. You are not so different from us humans, despite what your leaders might tell you. The bridge fell silent as the transmission ended. Kexithara looked around at her officers, seeing doubt and confusion in their eyes for the first time in her military career. General, Corvus said quietly, how did he know about my clutch mother's poetry, and why does he understand it better than most of our own scholars? It's impossible, Zilthek rumbled. Humans don't have the vocal structures to speak true Krathari. Yet I heard the ancient words pronounced with perfect accent and emotional inflection. The Vexti officers were chattering among themselves in their collective language, their individual voices blending into a harmonious whole. The human spoke to us as the ancients did, they said in unison. He understood our multiplicity in unity. Kexithara realized with growing horror that Ji-hoon's strategy was working. Her soldiers were no longer seeing humans as enemies to be destroyed, but as students of their cultures, enthusiastic learners who somehow understood them better than their own leaders did. How do you maintain military discipline, she thought to herself, when the enemy treats your heritage with more respect than your own command structure? Over the following days, Ji-hoon's broadcasts continued. He sang ancient Zephyrian lullabies, discussed Krathari military philosophy, and even composed new mathematical theorems in Vexti collective thought patterns. Each transmission demonstrated not just knowledge, but genuine appreciation and understanding. Kexithara watched her forces slowly transform. Officers who had once been eager for battle now spent their off-duty hours researching their own cultural histories, trying to understand how a human could know things about their species that they had never learned themselves. The psychological warfare was devastating in its simplicity. The humans weren't trying to demoralize or frighten their enemies. Instead, they were showing them that their cultures were beautiful, valuable, and worth preserving. They were making the hegemony soldiers want to be better guardians of their own heritage. Sir, Corvus approached her one day, I've been thinking about what the humans said, about my clutch mother's poetry. I never really understood it before, but hearing it through alien ears, It made me see the beauty I had taken for granted. HFY nodded grimly. That's exactly what they want you to think, Lieutenant. But what if they're right? Corvus asked quietly. What if we've been so focused on conquest that we've forgotten who we are? The question hung in the air, like a weapon more dangerous than any plasma cannon. HFY had no answer, and for the first time in her career she began to wonder if the humans had already won. The massive space station Terraform Station hung in the void like a metal flower, its rotating sections catching starlight as it spun slowly against the black canvas of space. For 6 months, it had been completely surrounded by the largest hegemony fleet ever assembled. 2,000 warships formed concentric rings around the human outpost, their weapons trained on every docking port and escape route. General HFY stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the station through reinforced transparasteel. The siege had been methodical, textbook perfect, all supply lines cut, all communication arrays jammed, all hope of rescue eliminated. According to her calculations, the humans inside should have surrendered weeks ago. Status report, she commanded, her 4 eyes never leaving the station. Day 183 of the siege, General, her aide replied. Long-range sensors detect no change in the station's power output or life support systems. They're still maintaining full operational capacity somehow. HFY's mandibles clicked in frustration. The humans had approximately 50,000 civilians aboard the station, along with maybe 5,000 military personnel. By now, they should be starving, desperate, ready to accept any terms, just to survive. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission from the station. It's unusual. On screen, HFY ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a human woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She sat in what appeared to be the station's central hub, surrounded by people of various species, all seemingly calm and well-fed. Greetings, General HFY, the woman said in fluent Zephyrian. My name is Sujin Park, and I'm the cultural coordinator for Terraform Station. I hope this message finds you and your crew in good health. HFY felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. Cultural coordinator? What kind of military position was that? We understand you've been waiting for us to surrender, Sujin continued, her tone conversational rather than defeated. But we've been using this time for something we called the greatest lesson. With your permission, we'd like to share it with you. Before HFY could respond, every communication channel on every ship in the fleet suddenly came alive. Not with military chatter or tactical updates, but with music, hauntingly beautiful melodies that seemed to speak directly to the soul. What is this? HFY demanded. General, her communications officer said, his voice filled with wonder. They've somehow bypassed all our jamming systems. Every screen, every speaker, every personal communicator in the fleet is receiving their transmission. The music faded, and Sujin's voice returned. But now she was speaking in perfect Krathari, her throat somehow producing the complex harmonic frequencies that should have been impossible for human vocal cords. To our Krathari friends, she said, we've been studying the war songs of your ancestors. Listen to this composition, created by combining traditional Krathari battle hymns with human orchestral arrangements. What followed was unlike anything HFY had ever heard. The deep primal roar of Krathari war chants blended seamlessly with delicate human string instruments, creating something that was both fierce and beautiful, alien and familiar. On the bridge, Captain Zilthek stood transfixed, his massive frame trembling with emotion. Impossible, he whispered. That melody. It's from the Song of First Blood, but I've never heard it performed with such understanding. Sojin's image appeared again, now speaking in the collective harmonies of the Vexti. To our friends who think as one, we offer this mathematical proof expressed as music. Each note represents a prime number in your base 7 system, creating a symphony of logic that we hope pleases your unified consciousness. The Vexti officers on various ships throughout the fleet began to hum along, their individual voices joining in perfect harmony as they recognized the mathematical patterns being expressed through sound. But Sujin wasn't finished. Her image multiplied across every screen, showing her in different locations throughout the station. She was in an art gallery, displaying paintings that captured the essence of Zephyrian spawning pools with a beauty that made Kexithara's breath catch. She was in a laboratory, demonstrating scientific principles that combined human ingenuity with alien physics. She was in a school, teaching human children to write their names in various alien scripts. "We've been learning," Sujin said, her voice now back in standard Galactic, but carrying undertones of all the languages she had spoken. "For the past 6 months, while you waited for us to surrender, we've been studying. Every transmission you've sent, every tactical frequency you've used has taught us something new about your cultures." The screens now showed human artists working alongside aliens of various species, creating sculptures that blended artistic traditions from across the galaxy. Human musicians were composing symphonies that incorporated the natural sounds of different homeworlds. Human children were playing games that had been invented on planets they had never seen. "But here's what we've discovered," Sujin continued, and now her voice carried a note of excitement that was infectious. "Your cultures aren't separate things. They're all part of something larger, something beautiful that emerges when different perspectives come together." Kexithara watched in growing horror as her own cultural heritage was reflected back to her through human eyes. Sujin began reciting Zephyrian poetry, but not just any poetry. She was reciting verses that captured the exact feeling of standing in the spawning pools at dawn, the precise emotion of watching new life emerge from the sacred waters. "The morning mist rises like souls ascending," Sujin said in ancient Zephyrian, while tiny voices chirp their first song to the twin moons above. In this moment, past and future dance together in the eternal now of becoming. Kexthara's legs nearly buckled. Those weren't just words translated from her language. They were thoughts expressed in the deepest, most authentic way possible. This human had somehow learned to think like a Zephyrian, to feel like a Zephyrian, to see the universe through Zephyrian eyes. "Sir," her aide whispered, "we're receiving reports from across the fleet. Soldiers are requesting permission to visit the station, not to attack, but to learn." Kexithara looked around her bridge and saw the same expression on every face. Wonder, curiosity, a hunger for something they couldn't name but desperately wanted to understand. "They're not trying to defeat us," she realized aloud. "They're trying to complete us." Sojin's voice continued, now sharing stories from every species in the hegemony fleet, but told with such insight and empathy that they seemed new, more meaningful than when their own people told them. "My soldiers weren't just defecting," Kexthara would later tell the tribunal. "They were evolving. The humans had somehow made war itself a teaching tool, a method of cultural exchange." She watched as her tactical officers began composing poetry, as her engineers started incorporating aesthetic principles from other species into their designs, as her soldiers began asking questions about the meaning of their existence that went far beyond military doctrine. "How do you fight an enemy that makes you want to become better than you are?" she whispered to herself, knowing that the war was already over, even though not a single shot had been fired at Terraform Station. The siege had become something else entirely. It had become a school, and every species present was both teacher and student. The silence in the great hall felt heavier than a dying star, every alien eye fixed on Kexithara as she rose from her chair one last time. Her silver armor caught the artificial lights, casting dancing shadows across the curved walls of the tribunal chamber. "For 30 years, I kept my mouth shut," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a plasma blade. "Not because I was ashamed of losing, not because humans broke our spirits with torture or destroyed our worlds with planet crackers. I stayed silent because none of you would have believed the truth." The lead judge, a towering Vorthak with crystalline eyes, leaned forward. "General, we have reviewed the battle records. Your fleet was the most advanced in hegemony history. 16,000 warships, including the flagship Eternal Dominion. How could primitive humans defeat such a force?" Kexthara laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "That's exactly the wrong question. You're still thinking like conquerors, like we did back then. The humans weren't trying to defeat us. They were trying to save us." She walked to the center of the chamber, her boots echoing against the polished floor. Around her, representatives from dozens of species watched with growing confusion. The insectoid Chithari clicked their mandibles nervously. The gaseous ethereals pulsed with uncertain colors. "Let me tell you what really happened in the Kepler Nebula," Kexthera continued. "We jumped in expecting a standard planetary siege. 3 human worlds, maybe 50 million people total. Our scouts reported basics, defensive platforms, nothing that could threaten a heavy cruiser, let alone our entire armada." She paused, remembering. Commander Thix was so confident, he started composing victory speeches before we even engaged. The humans had exactly 47 ships defending all 3 systems, ancient Earth designs, patched together with spare parts and hope. The Vorthak judge made a grinding sound of disbelief. 47 vessels against 16,000? This grows more impossible by the moment. "That's what we thought too," Kexithara said. "So when their lead ship opened a communication channel, we almost ignored it. Why waste time talking to dead beings? But something made me listen. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the way their captain sounded, not afraid, just sad." She closed her eyes, hearing the voice across 3 decades. Captain Joe, that was his name. He spoke perfect hegemony standard, better than some of our own officers. He said, "General Kexthara, we know why you're here. We know what the hegemony demands. Before this begins, we'd like to show you something. Not a weapon or a trap, just truth." The chamber grew impossibly quieter. Even the ethereals stopped their constant shimming, holding perfectly still. Against every regulation, every tactical manual we'd ever studied, I agreed. Joe transmitted coordinates to a small moon in the outer system. Said we could bring whatever escort we wanted. I took a full battle group, 200 ships surrounding his tiny courier vessel. Kexithara's voice grew softer, but somehow carried further. The moon looked dead from space. Cratered surface, no atmosphere, the kind of rock you'd use for target practice. But as we descended, our sensors picked up something impossible. Life signs, thousands of them. She opened her eyes, looking directly at the tribunal. It was a refugee camp, not human refugees, ours, hegemony citizens from the border worlds we'd lost to the Void Plague 5 years earlier, Kelvani miners, Thrax farmers, even a few Vorthak researchers. All of them alive, healthy, living in underground cities the humans had built. A ripple of shock ran through the chamber. The Void Plague had consumed 17 systems, turning everything it touched into lifeless grey dust. The hegemony had written off every soul in those regions as lost. Captain Joe walked me through their medical stations, Kexithara continued. Human doctors working beside hegemony healers, sharing research, treating patients they'd never seen before. He showed me schools where human children learned Kelvani mathematics, while Thrax younglings practiced Earth poetry. She gestured toward the tribunal, her movements sharp with remembered emotion. "Do you understand what this meant? While we were preparing to exterminate them, they were saving our people. Not for propaganda, not for leverage in some negotiation. They saved our refugees because letting them die was unthinkable." The Chithari representative clicked frantically. "But the invasion records show massive fleet movements, entire systems changing hands." "Oh, the fleets moved all right," Kexithara said with something approaching a smile. "But not the way our war planners expected. After seeing that moon, I sent coded messages to my task force commanders, not orders, questions. I asked them to speak with the human defenders before attacking." She began pacing, energy building in her voice. Captain Joe had introduced us to something called the Daohyun Protocol, named after an ancient human philosopher who believed the greatest victory was turning enemies into friends. While our intelligence services were tracking human military assets, they were tracking our needs. The Vorthak judge's crystals flashed with confusion. Needs. The frontier fleet needed medical supplies after the Crimson Fever epidemic. Humans had already prepared shipments of compatible medicines and delivered them to neutral space stations. The mining coalition wanted better asteroid processors. Human engineers had designed systems specifically for hegemony equipment standards. Kexithara stopped pacing, standing perfectly still in the center of the chamber. Every battle was the same. We'd arrive ready for war. They'd ask us to stay for dinner. They'd show us their refugees, their research, their children learning our languages. They'd ask what we needed, what our people back home were struggling with. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Within 6 months, my soldiers were requesting extended deployments to human systems, not as conquerors, as partners. They were learning human cooking, teaching them our engineering techniques, building joint research stations. The silence stretched until the ethereal representative finally pulsed a question in pure light language. Kexthara nodded as if she understood. Yes, command noticed. High General Vextor sent 3 more fleets to restore order. They all sent back the same reports. Mission accomplished, systems secured, requesting permanent assignment for cultural exchange programs. She looked up at the massive viewport showing the stars beyond. The war ended not with surrender documents or territorial concessions. It ended with the largest celebration in recorded galactic history. 500,000 beings from dozens, 5 species, dancing together in the orbital gardens above New Geneva. Kexthara moved toward the chamber doors, her testimony complete. My former soldiers didn't become prisoners of war. They became ambassadors, teachers, friends. The humans called it the greatest military victory in galactic history, a war won by refusing to see enemies, only potential allies. She reached the exit and turned back one final time. You wanted to know why we lost? We didn't lose. We won something better than conquest. We won a future worth living in. The doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the tribunal alone, with a truth that would remake their understanding of warfare, victory, and what it truly meant to be civilized beings in an endless galaxy.